some of the stuff, I remember the first time I came to Sweden, I think I've been talking about the same theme for a long time. And some of the things you hear tonight, some of you may have heard it from me before. But there's a big difference. Some of the stories that I've shared, I've mentioned me having those experiences in South Africa with someone, and I've decided to bring that person along with me this time, who does a better job of explaining the situation. So my really, really good friend Tania, who I've known for maybe a decade, is here with me tonight, and we're going to share some of our experiences of how diversity has gone horribly wrong, and how diversity, we've tried to change it in a little bit to make it work for us. And we have some observations about Sweden as well.
Yes.
And that you really like to hug, and you really wear your emotions on your face, and you eat kalas caviar with the egg with a straight face. So anyway, all right. So we're very different people, not just from the way we look, but where we come from in terms of our heritage. 150 years ago, I came from that end of the world called India. Not me physically, I'm not 150 years old, but someone in my family was shipped by the British to India. And 350 years ago, someone from Tania's lineage came all the way around Africa and we ended up in the same part of the world. But for very different reasons, very different times. And one of the things that's actually happened is that we really shouldn't be allowed to be friends.
Actually.
Yeah, we weren't allowed to even visit each other's houses 30 years ago. And that's because of this crazy thing called apartheid.
Yeah, so there's a story in South Africa about not being able to be under the same roof, actually, white and the rest of the people. So we have an extra race called coloureds, which doesn't exist in the rest of the world. And as some people have secrets to hide, one of the families in South Africa actually had a coloured child, even though they were white. And sort of initially, everyone accepted that in the community. And then people started asking questions, because why does this child look so different? And that community actually managed to abandon that child. The family had to move away because that child, even though they were coming from those two parents and probably skipped a lineage of some people stepping over the line, they ended up couldn't have their own kid in their own house. So, and that was only 30 years back.
Yes. So yes, it was a strange country to live in then. 30 years ago, we couldn't stand on the same beach together. Our beaches were split up. This section is for white, this section is for black, this section is for Indian, of my origin and heritage, and then what Tania called coloured, which is people of interracial marriage and offspring. So it was a very, very different world. And all of a sudden, with the fall of apartheid, we end up working together. And that's and that was an oddity. How do you suddenly work with someone whom you're supposed to hate? We were conditioned in that way. You should hate the other person. If you didn't hate that person, there's something inherently wrong with you. So you end up growing in a society where hatred is accepted. That's strange. I mean, it's very strange for you guys because you haven't had a war in, I don't know, how many, 2,000 years?
202.
There we go. And everyone loves everyone here in Sweden. I know that. So it was a society that was designed to create enemies of each other. And how do you suddenly have to work together? That's a big issue. And so the question we've battled with in the workplace and in society is that it's a really tough question. What makes us different and what makes us the same? If I ask you what's different about you, what would come to mind? If I asked you what's the same between yourself and the person sitting next to you, can you even articulate it? For us, it's a very, very complex question. There's someone at the door that's trying to get in. Karina's at the door trying to come in. Okay. So in South Africa, we've got so many people who are indigenous to the region. Zulu, Xhosa, Sotho, Venda, Swana, Tsonga, Swazi, Ndebele, Shona, and then people who have made this their home. English, Dutch, Afrikaner, Indian, French, Portuguese, Cape-colored, Malaysian, German. The list goes on. We have 11 official languages. And so how do you communicate? How do you work with those? And behind each language, there's a culture.
And even just having said that, the only two cultures that officially, or we call them tribes, because there's still tribes in South Africa, people that's living a tribal lifestyle within the economy. I mean, South Africa's got the biggest GDP, well, Gauteng, actually, where I come from, not Aslam, but I come from there, in Africa. And it's only Xhosa and Zulu. Okay, so even though we look at Africa from the outside and we see people that look similar, they actually don't think that they're similar at all. So there's a whole lot of undercurrents and differences in people that on the outside look very similar, but their traditions and the way they look at life and how they put themselves in their own class system, etc., where they are, who's in charge, etc., all of that's part of the country.
It's most probably odd for you to hear us speak openly about some of these things. The nature of our society where we come from is that if we don't talk openly and transparently about such things as what makes us different, is a variation in your skin color, does that make you different? Is it the way you look? Is it whether you wear a tattoo or not? Whether you shave your head or not? Does that make you different? Whether you wear a burqa or not, does that make you different? Is there a different belief system? And then the big question, which hasn't really been resolved, is it your identity? And so the big question is, what is your identity? Is Swedish your identity? Is it Scandinavian? What is your identity? Is it that I'm of Indian heritage? Is that my identity? These are really schizophrenic questions. And it's a tough one to deal with. And where we work, we grapple with these questions all the time. So, and on the flip side of that, we can ask the question of what makes us the same? One thought that came to mind is that we're the same because we're all human. So we should be human. We designed a workshop called Be Human that dealt with interpersonal conflict in the workplace. And that was a weird topic. What do you mean we must be human? Of course we're human. But what does it mean for actually to behave and have a mindset that makes you human? So that's a big question.
Actually, that's probably the only thing that we're not, is human.
So we want to talk about a project. This is a time where I met Tania. It was
2006.
2006. I met Tania. I was a director in a pretty large consulting company, and Tania walked in because she applied for a job, and we offered her the job. It was a quick interview. I spoke to her and I said, "Okay, please make an appointment with my colleague and work out your compensation, and we'll see you next week." Because I was arrogant enough to think she'll take the job, and I was glad she took it. And it was for a very large project. It was the largest project that we ever had as a company at that point in time. And it was an amazing project because we were going to be all agile. And it was like so much of love in the air because we will be completely integrated with our customer and each other. And, we'll be co-located even. It's so amazing. And we'll write user stories together and run tests, and it was just going to be fantastic.
And we just want to point out that this project was about 12 years after the breakdown of apartheid, and it was in the government.
Yeah, it was in the government, and we were cross-functional. You know, it was all of those wonderful, wonderful values. You know, and one of the things was signs of when it started going wrong was when the contract that we had to sign took more than 6 weeks to sign, and there was a problem. And I'll just run through it. Class differences. Economic class differences started emerging very quickly. Racial differences. Gender, which you also experience here. Gender differences was a big issue. Appearance, educational background, where you parked your car in the building was an issue. Who was closest to the elevator was an issue. It created a difference. And so one of the things I did at that moment in time, recognizing some of these things, but I had no idea how to solve it. And I officially was higher rank. I became a developer, and I told Tania, I'll report to you because it was important for, in that situation, given that apartheid was designed by stereotypically the Afrikaner community, I had an Afrikaner woman that I will report to run this project with a multitude of mixed race people, a lot of them men, in a patriarchal society to report to Tania. That was my brainwave that blew up. And there's so many stories to share there. I mean,
yeah, I mean, some of the interesting things were, as a white in South Africa, you're actually not allowed to have a conversation about racial differences. So we had in the office, I don't know if you guys have unions here, labor unions, okay. Yes. Generally in South Africa, white people are not part of labor unions. So mostly it's on the African side. And Australia invited, we had a lot of retrenchments. If you were white in South Africa, we've got something called Black Economic Empowerment. That's a big drive for the government. So it's about putting black people in a position of running companies and getting equal economic power. And we had a conversation about an article in the newspaper that said the Australian government offered free jobs to any white policeman that was retrenched in South Africa. And we just had a discussion about it. And the next day, one of the directors in the company came to me and said that they reported me to the labor union, and I've got a report there for some hearing. And I said, I will not do that. I mean, I can have a conversation about people immigrating because of race. I didn't say anything to offend someone, so why should I go and explain myself to a union? That carried on for a few weeks. Being the strong-headed person I am, I refused to go, and I didn't go. I created a lot of havoc for this guy in my life, refusing to go and speak to the unions. But I mean, for me it was, we should have a freedom of speech. We should be able to express ourselves, and that's actually a huge part of diversity, or how they're trying to encourage diversity in our society is a freedom of speech. You should be able to say things that you need to say and have open discussions, but it only seems to apply to part of the community in South Africa, which this was one of the examples. I also had a lot of Zulu guys, and there's a lot of traditional gender differences in Zulus. And the one guy asked me, why are you working? What are you doing here? It's this is someone that was in the client's team that was reporting to me. And it's these type of challenges that you have to lead a team, but people are questioning what you're doing here. You should be staying at home because you're a woman. Okay, so people in my society don't work. Women, Zulu women don't work. You should stay at home. So those were some of the challenges we faced on the project. I took a lot of emotional strain. Aslam were trying to make me a better person, clearly.
Don't you? I mean, we have very, very intense conversations. At one point, someone stood up and called Tania a white supremacist because of her views, which was completely off the charts, because we're sharing an opinion about a society in which we find ourselves that was in transition. remember once these differences became so intense that at one meeting you were in the boardroom and I was sitting outside, and I could hear the volume of conversation getting higher and higher, and eventually I walk in and I tell the client, the director of the clients, I said, back to your corner. Because his colleague was calling Tania an idiot or something like that, literally insulting in that way. It was verbal abuse. It was back to your corner. And I told Tania, please take your things and go home now. I'll deal with this. That's the kind of intensity of conflict that we were faced with. I'd never experienced anything like that in my life. And that is the situation we're working. I mean, I didn't even know that software developers had a union. I would have signed up a long time ago.
No,
maybe
you
I
wouldn't
will.
have.
Maybe I will. Developers have rights. Come on. Developers have rights. Geeks have rights. Hey? Yeah? What rights do you have? Huh? You have a right to estimate in any story point you like. T-shirt sizes. So anyway, so it was really, really intense. It got to a point where we invited an industrial psychologist to mediate. It's the first project and only project that we've both worked on where we had professional mediation of a team. That's the intensity of conflict. It was there's a richness to everyone sitting in that room with diverse views, opinions, thoughts, all of that, and it just went boom. It just exploded completely. And that is what we call toxic diversity, is that without being aware of those differences, it just runs away from you so quickly.
But it's more than that. It's not just about not being aware. It's about not having the space to express it. Okay, so a lot of the stuff came from the injustices of the past, and people were living it out on this project because it was sort of a reverse situation where the old depressed people were now running the project and being in charge, and there's other people that used to be called supremists that's now working class people on this project. So this was really what was playing out. So there was a huge undercurrent of the old situation. And I mean, you guys probably to a certain extent can relate to that. I mean, in Europe there is a lot of undercurrents. We'll talk later about the differences we've seen in your country, which I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but for us coming from the outside, it's glaringly obvious that there is divides. Yeah, it was that unresolved feelings from something that's totally loose standing from the project that we're working on. But because people don't have a forum or a place to express how they're feeling, it just spills into the workplace. So it's almost like we were dealing with this unseen thing in our space.
Yeah, it genuinely felt like 350 years of history of this country was compacted in a few months within one building. And all these feelings and emotions about the injustices and justices and differences of the past and present just bubbled out. And it played itself out, and it's for many years after. We both often talk about it. And one of the issues is a lot of it comes down to a politics of power. The moment someone wants to take a superior position, even in a conversation momentarily, it's one over the other, superiority over inferiority. The moment someone takes that position, the conversation changes, the dynamics change, the way you respond changes. Identity, I spoke about it earlier, I mentioned what is identity, but to establish who you are in a large, very diverse group of people is a big deal. Do you suppress your identity for the collective? That's a big problem to solve. I mean, undercurrent of the history of apartheid, we spoke about that. And one of the things that we were even talking in preparing this talk with you was that the objective is not your purpose. The project had an objective. We needed to produce software that was going to do something and have an impact. But what was our purpose? Our purpose is not, I mean, we could say my purpose is to fulfill the objective. But that for us felt like a really weak position to take. Our purpose should be much larger than that. What is the impact you have on society? What impact you have on each other? What is your purpose? And it was all folded and conflated into the goals of the project. So it was really, really intense, and took a long time for us to even think about some of these things. But there's another story. That took us years to get over. I wouldn't lie to you. It took us years to get over. And then in 2012, Tania went her own way, I went my own way, and then we crossed paths again a few years later. Always been in contact, but not working together. And then in 2012, she started a company called Infoware Studios, which I think is a fantastic example of diversity done in a very, very, very healthy way. And I'm not qualified to talk about this.
Yeah, so sort of one of the challenges has always been for me is how do we actually get people to move forward from the disposition and the conditioning that they have. And one of the things we do is we've got people from 4 different African countries working in our space, also different genders, even within South Africa, lots of different tribes. They don't all speak the same language. Sometimes we use 4 languages in one sentence. So it becomes really complex to work in that space. We also arrange the span of people are quite large. So we've got guys that just graduated in a software engineering sort of type of qualification, and then we've got people with 20 plus years experience. And how do you make that work? And one of the things that we focus on a lot is to overcome diversity, is really coming down to the core of who you are as a person. So irrespective of the color of your skin, the gender, what is your purpose? What are you actually doing here? And we force people to explore that. Not force, but it's part of our culture. We disclose it up front. If you want to work in this business, you are going to have to go on a very aggressive personal discovery journey, because that breaks down the barriers and all of these beliefs and conditioning. I mean, I started this journey personally when I was 16 years old, trying to get rid of all the conditioning of just the environment I grew up in, trying to shield that shackle so I can see the world for what it is and not for what other people want me to see it. So that's a strong driver for us, and we've been able to do that successfully. So after 4 years, we have managed to break down differences. We've got, and we'll share some. Is that the bell? We'll share some of the techniques that we use in our team to actually overcome that. But it's really going down to the core of who you are and creating a safe space to express and experience emotion and conflict, and sort of working towards resolving it constructively. We actually have a situation in our team currently is if a project or we're going through some really difficult situations or a difficult client or a difficult project or difficult problem we want to solve, if someone is not getting upset in the team, then everyone is asking what's wrong here, okay, because we're not expressing how we're feeling. So it's almost that's the space that it's grown towards. Aslam and myself sometimes have to hold a lot of religious people. A lot of the African countries are very, very, very Christian orientated. And we have people that's completely, not without religion, but that's not what drives them. And how do you find that balance of not saying the wrong things in the wrong environment? So even some of our teams, just in terms of the diversity that we deal with, is often the first person with a real job in that family. So they have the social economic power or pressure to actually supply for 20-odd people. So for a young software developer having their first job that's earning 20,000 Rand, having to supply for everyone in their family that doesn't have a job giving them a little bit of their money just to get by is something that is a real challenge. So it's that dynamic coming in. So it's really a very complex environment to work in. Many things go wrong. Some of the people, I don't know if you've got domestic workers in Sweden.
Someone who cleans your house.
So we have quite a lot of that. So some of the people in our team, actually their mothers were still, well, sort of cleaners in households, and they now educated engineers, and all of a sudden there's this huge expectation on that person's shoulders to make a difference and provide for everyone. From people that sort of middle class to people that doesn't have jobs, their families are still living as tribes. So it's, even within a specific culture, there's lots of differences.
Mm. And in South Africa, you cannot exist without having an opinion that you share. You cannot sit in a conversation and talk about politics, this incident that happened, and not offer an opinion and a position. If you don't take a position, there's something odd with you. So we're very comfortable with sharing our expression and emotion, but the key is, how do you do it in a healthy way? How do you do it in a way that allows it to be done in a respectful way? And that's some of the things that we've been working with. And so what is different is respectful conversation. You can imagine, with this kind of intensity that spoke about in the previous project, even within the company that Tania's built up over the years, the same issues are still there. It's not that it's gone away, but how do you have a conversation in a respectful way is a big deal. And to remind each other to speak in a respectful way. Not, there's a fine line between being respectful and being politically correct. Politically correct can detract you from the real issue. So you actually want to speak about the hard issue in a very precise way, without being offensive to someone, without attacking the person, but speaking to the issue. The other thing which I know you do a lot is you remind each other of purpose, especially in a tense situation. You know, at the moment there's a project that is really, really intense, and so there's long hours, and we're trying to recover time and all of those things. And in the middle of that, I've seen Tania stand up and talk and says, but remember why we're here. What is our purpose? We're here because of the following. We're here to change the society in which we live. The project is one step in that direction, so let's not forget that. And suddenly people will start having a conversation about their purpose. Again, it's a repeat. It's reinforced. And the other part which I've learned from Tania is clear, direct, and immediate feedback. Absolutely immediate. It's in that moment. You provide feedback in a very respectful way. It is unheard of in the workplace which we find ourselves for someone to come and says, but do you remember 3 weeks ago you told me this and I was really upset by it. It is dealt with there and then. You do not let those things linger. Beg your pardon?
We'll actually give you an example of how the techniques we used to do that just now. Would that be okay? Okay.
Okay. So those three things are the top three things that we embody as themes in the way we work, that exists regardless of what techniques we apply. And so the key ingredients here: respect, aligned purpose, has to be a mutual benefit. And the last one, it's something that we insist on, is a willingness to actually explore and understand deeply, not superficially, but deeply.
Yeah, so on that, I don't know if you know that 80% of all communication is through body language. Did you know that? Which is obviously the Agile drive in terms of having people co-located. But even though you don't want to recognize someone is upset with you, you actually do know it. You might refuse to accept or want to deal with it, but if you're having an interaction with someone, there's someone in that something in that person's body language. If you feel that they're disrespecting you, they probably are, because of the way that they're behaving and putting their body, or the way they're posturing, etc. So this is really about being in the moment. Okay, so something that we create through our personal development focus in the business is making people aware of being in the moment. Because most people either lived in the past or they live in the future. One of the key challenges of the human condition is being able to experience the now. Okay, so, and if you're in the now, you can recognize and take the pause when you're seeing someone is reacting in a way that you don't understand. And that's some of the things that we encourage. Is you see someone has had a reaction, take a moment to pause and ask the question, okay, but I see you've reacted in that way. What's going on in your mind? It's about inquiring and trying to understand, so you could actually deal with the aspects as and when it happens, instead of allowing things to creep up in a team where there's diverse people over a period of time. That's sort of try and understand why someone has a different view to you. It doesn't mean there's a right or a wrong. It actually adds a lot of creativity in our space and the way that we tackle solutions and how we come up with ideas, by accepting that people are different, and by exploring the differences we can come up with the best solution, by taking or tapping into people's different backgrounds, different races, different languages, etc. So that's sort of that willingness to understand and explore is quite a big thing that we drive.
And I'm just going to mention it again, the mutual benefit. If there isn't a mutual benefit, we don't go into the situation.
Oh yeah, that's a very important thing. So in diverse cultures, and I've seen it in Sweden as well, people that's not natively Swedish, we've seen that there's a separation. It's very interesting how similar it is to what we sometimes see in South Africa. In no situation, if you're not going after a win-win situation in a diverse environment, you are fighting a losing battle. Okay, so you cannot go from a point of economic power or what I can get out of it. You always have to ask the question, what else can I contribute to the person that's sitting across from me? That's irrespective of race, etc. If you can just adopt that mindset, you can already start transitioning some of the diversity and overcoming that. And that's something that's really key for us, something that we found that works.
And it's stated. We talk about it. In this situation, this relationship results in this for you and this for me. And we're both comfortable with that. And so you talk about it. It's not an unspoken thing. So there's a few things that we do.
And this is the techniques and example that you asked about.
So there's a few things we've done, and we still do. I'll take a couple of them, and Tania will take some of them. Some of them we've done in workshop style for other companies that we've consulted with, and things that we actually do within the company itself. In any organization where I sit down in, I actually use these techniques as well. The first one is one-on-one storytelling. And that's literally creating a space and a moment and a time in your organization where people pair up and you actually tell your history. You talk about where you come from. You talk about your family. You talk about what got you to this moment in time. And it's as intimate and as detailed as you're comfortable with. And what we found is that people sometimes start off in a very, very superficial way, but as the other person starts sharing a bit more, then the conversation starts flowing between two people. But the way we started off is that one person is absolutely a listener. The other person is the one talking. And the person listening then actually tells the story back. So you encourage that active listening. So if I was sitting with Eva and she was telling me her story, I'd sit very quietly and then I'll say, this is what I learned about you, Eva. And I'll share that story back to you. And then we reverse it. And so it means that I have to internalize what you're doing. And I'll also go to the point where this is how I felt when you shared your story to me. And so you get to express my feelings having heard that. And it's so empowering to have one person dedicated to listening your story. Very few of us have that opportunity in life. And when you do it in a workplace, it breaks down the barriers. You forever have a connection with that person that you'd never had before.
And an understanding.
Yes.
So that helps some of the diversity stuff. So there's actually, because of apartheid, there's quite a big divide between black and white in South Africa. And actually what is the sad thing, all the rest of the coloureds and the Indian people are sort of Asians are all pushed to the side because of this rivalry between these two specific races. And one of the things that we've seen is how people don't know what community service white people still do in South Africa. And black people have this perception, some of the young people even today have a perception about what it means to be, it's an oppressor, they have very negative labels that sits on us. And when they engage on that level, all of a sudden they see, oh, but they've put 5 kids through school this year. And they've just this. And this is just having this personal conversations with people that helps unpack that. And all of a sudden that diversity gets broken down because you're starting to understand that this person is not actually the labels that I'm being conditioned to believe in. They're actually doing all of these other things that I didn't know about. So that's something that we found really, really powerful in terms of shifting small dynamics in between people where we can see this tension. So because that comes down to being human, right? Yes. There's stuff that we do irrespective of where we come from or our race or our gender. And stuff that we do as humans, and that's why we call it be human.
That leads us to the next technique, which we had done a few times, which is how do you expose your perception of stereotypes? And stereotypes exist across all of society. And the way we run this technique is that it's a group exercise, and we put up on a large flip chart paper on a wall the stereotype in the middle, and based on the diversity in the group, we create segments to say, okay, so if we're talking about what's the stereotype of a black male, that's the stereotype that's in the middle. And me, as someone of Indian heritage, what's my perception of that? And we take sticky notes and we put it up. And initially, and another half of the chart would be what is the white woman's perception of a black male. Now, I can see some of you looking at me like there's no way this will ever happen in Sweden. Trust me, it's a really, really difficult technique to get going in any organization, in any group of people. But you got to be brave as a facilitator and stand up and actually very quietly. The room goes absolutely silent. Are you crazy? Are you mad? Do you want me to put up on a sticky note that I think this about that? Really? And so we actually stand up and we genuinely do this and say, this is how I perceive it. This is the way I've been brought up to perceive this. And we start putting it up. And slowly people start standing up and putting it up. And yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, there is a difference.
Yeah, and I mean, it's about picking the stereotypes that's relevant for your team or your environment. Because, I mean, obviously for us, it's completely different to what it would be for you.
Yes, yes. Yes, yeah. Yeah, it can be very different. And I'm sharing a facilitation technique to get it going. It might, as a facilitator, it might not be my belief, but I'm going to put something on to encourage the conversation, to encourage this to happen. Yes. Yes, to give that. Yes. And
but actually, you need to share both, because I, for instance, grew up obviously in a conservative Afrikaner household, and most of my friends says, how is it possible that you grew up in this family? Are you sure you're from there? So even though I was in that space, I managed to form my own views. So it's about sharing both, because you also, in my case, I had to fight against this. I actually deliberately moved town, because where I grew up, it was in South Africa, everyone knows that's the Afrikaner capital of South Africa, and I didn't want to be seen as being part of those people, because that's not how I define myself. I don't relate to anything they do. I don't speak the way they do. I don't do the same things, even though I grew up in that society. So it's about sharing both of it, because the things that might not be okay is the stuff that will upset people, and that gets the emotion going to talk about the stuff and the indifferences and the diversity, which often people don't have the opportunity to do. So in our case, apartheid is obviously one of those things, and this type of a technique allows people to actually speak about how angry they are about stuff, and it allows a forum for people to collaborate and get it out of their system.
And you can also do it with, start off with some simple, non-threatening, non-controversial. Developer as a stereotype, and what do the analysts think of developers, and the project manager think? Oh, the best one is put the project manager in the middle. And then you start building the stereotypical perspectives of that. And then you can even do it with the client. I mean, we've done it in a workshop with a company where they put the client in the middle and says, what do we understand of the client? And then you get all this data, and then you stand back and you look at it as a group and you say, well, how much of it is truth? And invariably, it is a perception, going back to your observation of the situation, is that you ask people explicitly, do you really believe that to be the truth? Is that what you carry in your heart as that? And most people, no, I can't believe we actually think like this. And so it's a way of getting past the stereotype and the perception of the stereotypes. And then you just take the data and you just move on. It's done. It's there. You've spoken about it. It's taking the taboo topic and talking about it in a respectful way. And so, I mean, the other three techniques, I mean, straight talks.
Yeah, I think I'll talk about straight talk. We have a few minutes left. Yeah. So how do we actually get to have respectful conversations? And this is something coming from a Dutch descent, I'm quite passionate, and I often have to tone myself down. So last night I was told that I shouldn't be too passionate today because people might see me as aggressive. So
Swedes have love on their faces as well.
So one of the techniques, it was actually developed by a lady in South Africa called Straight Talk. So you can read up on it. I'm not sure if the books is available here, but I mean, if you want more information about it, it's really insightful. She talks about conversations in business areas specifically, and it's a simple technique. So I'm going to give you the few steps. Okay, so Straight Talk is about, we all find ourselves in situations where we have to address something really difficult with someone in the team, even at home, okay? And we don't have the guts to have the conversation. And why don't we have the guts? Can anyone tell me why do we generally not have the guts to have that conversation? Yeah? That's... Yes. 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 So all of this is generally not good things. So we've all had experience where we probably came from a very good place in our heart to have a conversation, and it didn't turn out at all as we expected. Okay, so, and these are all the things that you just highlighted. So what Straight Talk is about is structuring your conversation in a few basic steps. And this works, okay? I've gone into teams where I've managed only guys in a team, 50, 70 of them, and I walk into a conversation, then it doesn't turn out the way I thought it did. I mean, I sort of walk out there with a good intention in my heart, and then I walk out of there having to recover this by 2 or 3 other conversations. And this technique basically starts out with you setting the objective. So whenever you talk to someone, don't try and lure them into a situation where they don't know what it's about. Okay? If you have a conversation with someone, declare the objective up front. Say, this is what I want to talk about. So, because if you sort of a little bit cagey about it and this person comes in there, they're already on the back foot before you even started having a conversation. So they go into defense mode. So anything that's going to come out of your mouth is probably going to they're going to try and defend it and come up with. So set the objective. Then state your side of the story. That's the second step. So, and there's a few words that we don't use in this conversation. You don't use you. You never use the word you, okay? Because the moment you say you, it's like a finger pointing. It's like, and then you go defensive immediately. So you don't use the word you. What you do talk about is your feelings or your emotions. So how does it make you feel? This situation is not good for me because I experience a lot of stress when you engage with me in that way. So I sort of struggle to breathe, or I don't know what to say, or whatever it is for you. I'm just making up a fictitious example, but it's about saying, speaking from your heart, saying this is how it makes me feel, and don't get personal, because words like you make it personal. Then you go into a personal battle with that person, and then it doesn't turn out the way you want it to be. And then once you've stated your case, you give them, the third step is give them the opportunity to state their case. And you have to listen. Even if they use the wrong words, if you start using this technique, we all teach each other, you have to find a strong place in you if they start using you and they start accusing you. It's about, in that moment, you have to keep quiet. You're not allowed to say anything. You've got to let them vent and say whatever it needs. And then the fourth step is to do some mediation. So there will be some discussion that you have. That's the fourth step. So you'll have to engage and collaborate and share some ideas. And then the last step is basically some actions or things that both people can take from the step. So that concludes it, because otherwise it's just a discussion and we don't actually move forward with something constructively. So that's probably one of the most valuable techniques I've personally learned in managing teams and environments, especially in a diverse space.
I've been subject to that with Tania. It was very awkward, and I'm forever grateful for that. So. So I'm going to wrap up here, and there's things that we've noticed, having worked in extremely toxic situation with diverse teams, where we did not have the techniques we talked about, and it just ran away from us, and it was hard to bring back, and yet there's situations where we've been deliberate in our use of these techniques to break down and make people aware of each other and share. At the end of the day, it's the ability to share your feelings. It really, really does come down to that. And so we find that we tend to grow and challenge ourselves in a very, very healthy way with this. We find there's an increased or consistent productivity that comes out of the teams that we work with in this kind of situations. There's a high degree of self-awareness of people. Even if it's a situation, for example, someone is being passive-aggressive, they suddenly will realize, oops, I shouldn't have done that in that way. There's the high degree of self-awareness. And if you can create a sense of self-awareness in a person, it changes your relationship forever. It's so much easier to work with people that have high self-awareness. And we find that these things actually allow us to do that, or we become that. Once you get past these personal issues, the creativity in the team starts skyrocketing. Whether it's an operational problem you're solving, or whether it's a software problem you're solving, or anything, any topic, any problem, the diversity of thought in an unconstrained, healthy environment is remarkable. And that's one of the biggest things that we get out of this, is that we just get creativity for free.
And this is true collaboration. It's the word that Agile uses, collaboration. This is how you get collaboration, by getting people to communicate about the real stuff, not about the things on the side, about addressing and giving them some tools to have the courage to have the conversation directly when it happens.
And the way you deal with conflict in a healthy way, and you wear your emotions on the outside, is a big deal. I've walked into Tania's office a few times, and it's deadly quiet, and someone would come and ask and say, something's wrong with Tania because she's not sharing her feelings. And it's from anyone that's on the team. Like, Tania, you better go out there and talk to them because you're keeping it bottled up. And that is the expectation. That's how the culture changes, is that there's an expectation of being able to share your feelings very, very openly. And even if you have a rant and you stand up there and you start screaming your head off and say, I absolutely hate the situation, I can't believe it's happened, and who the hell did this, and why did this, like, okay, it's fine, we'll calm down after this, have your say, get the energy out, then we'll talk, and you carry on. And it's okay. And so you allow that to happen, the space and the safety attached to that. So, that's our story, and the few days we've been here, we noticed the weather's fantastic. We've also noticed there's a very diverse community of people, and I've seen that change as well. We now get stopped on the other side of the bridge and on this side of the bridge with my passport and my visa and all sorts of strange things, and I wonder why I'm being treated like a criminal. But it's okay, it's fine.
Although where we come from, we used to that.
So there is a diversity of community in Sweden, and I think it's increasing, and I think in Scandinavia, and I think in all of Europe, it exists. There's people here from different parts of Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia, and they exist. If I look at the audience, it's not homogeneous. Whoever says the society is consistently the same has not been here. And so how do you deal, the questions that we have, that we don't have answers for, because it's a different context, is how do you deal with this situation? How do you create an integrated team with these kinds of different viewpoints and different histories? At the end of the day, we all have a different history along the same timeline that brings us to this spot standing right here. And so how do we appreciate each other for that history? And then, how do you extract mutual benefit in such a society? And so those are the questions we leave you with, because we're going to leave on Saturday, and that's your problem. So anyway. But Tania, thanks for coming and visiting. And thank you for listening for us for a long time. So thank you.
Sure.